Hello there. Welcome to Cool Talk in the 1990s. The 80s were over and people were hopeful. It was the last decade of the 20th century. And we saw a war won, peace in the Middle East, the dissolution of the Soviet Union and its influence, the deficit in the United States became a surplus, apartheid was over, and yes, there was still racial tension, but people were looking forward to the 21st century. It was a time of hope and promise. However, when the 21st century started, those hopes were dashed. But first, we have to get through the 1990s. Let's begin. The Soviet Union saw its satellite countries slipping away: Lithuania, Poland, Armenia, and so on. These changes had repercussions in the America. For example, Violeta Chamorro became president of Nicaragua, defeating the socialist Sandinistas. Labor leader Lech Walesa becomes president of a now free Poland. Leader Mikhail Gorbachev of the Soviet Union approved changes to the market. McDonald's, a symbol of Americanism, was now open in the Soviet Union and China. Former Panamanian dictator Manuel Noriega was sentenced in a Miami court to 40 years for money laundering and drug trafficking. He would later be extradited to France, where he died of a brain tumor in 2017. In South Africa, President F.W. de Klerk announces that Nelson Mandela activists would be released from prison after 27 years. In the scientific world, the Voyager 1 probe, a satellite launched in 1977, was now 3.5 million miles away. It would send back this photo, the famous pale blue dot. That is the planet Earth, everybody. Smoking is now banned on all U.S. flights. A painting by Vincent van Gogh is sold for $82.5 million. And Sue, the best preserved Tyrannosaurus rex, is discovered in South Dakota. In Africa, Namibia becomes independent and Yemen reunifies. However, in Liberia, civil war breaks out when President Samuel Doe is captured by rebels and executed. Over in Asia, a civil war breaks out in Sri Lanka, over in the East Provinces. Then in Myanmar, Aung San Suu Kyi and her National League for Democracy helps guide the party to win over 80% of parliament. But the military refuses to hand over power. Aung San would spend most of the next 21 years under house arrest. The big news from Iraq: Saddam Hussein sends troops into neighboring Kuwait. President George Bush forms a coalition of allies, including 12 Arab nations, to discourage further Iraqi invasion. War was imminent.
Funny how? I mean, what's funny about it?
Please, look at yourself.
Now, look at yourself. I have sickness. Sickness took me out of the world.
Face to face, but he's a fool.
the United States Congress passes a resolution authorizing military force to remove Iraqi forces from Kuwait. The events move quickly. President Bush places a deadline, but it expires, and so begins Operation Desert Storms. The Allies go through Saudi Arabia into Kuwait. Now, Saddam Hussein retaliates by sending missiles into Israel. Several airstrikes later, ground troops leave Saudi Arabia, enter Kuwait, smart bombs destroy the bunkers in Baghdad, and by February, Saddam Hussein gave up. He announced that he would withdraw his forces from Kuwait. But before he does, his army sets fire to the oil fields of Kuwait, a fire that would last 8 months. Heavyweight champion Mike Tyson is arrested and charged with rape. He will be convicted and sentenced to 6 years, but was released in 4. Eastern Airlines shuts down after 62 years. In Africa, civil wars broke out in Somalia, Ethiopia, and Sierra Leone. August 6, the first website, info.cern.ch. In Eastern Europe, Georgia left the Soviet Union and Soviet troops left Poland. Now, some Soviet hardliners said enough was enough and they staged a coup. They were going to take over. Mikhail Gorbachev was put into house arrest while he was vacationing in Crimea. But 100,000 demonstrators protest the move and he was released along with his family. But it was all over. Several republics began to leave the Union. Ukraine, Belarus, Moldavia, Kyrgyzstan, Uzbekistan, Azerbaijan, Tajikistan, Turkmenistan, Kazakhstan, and Armenia, they all left. Gorbachev resigns. The new leader was Boris Yeltsin, and he bans the Communist Party. Leningrad went back to being the St. Petersburg. The Soviet Union went back to being Russia. Russia discontinued its military aid to Cuba. This was monumental news. The Federal Republic of Yugoslavia began to dissolve as the Serbs showed aggression. Over in Salvador, rebels reached an agreement with President Alfredo Christian. In sports, Michael Schumacher makes his Formula One debut. Hostage Terry Waite was released in Lebanon after 4 years of captivity. Terrorists were apprehended and charged with the 1988 attack on a Pan Am Flight 103, where a bomb exploded in mid-flight, killing 259 on board and 11 more on the ground in Lockerbie, Scotland. Unfortunately, only one person was convicted. After decades, Part 2 of Gone with the Wind was released, and other books would also appear in 1991.
Oh, I see. You want to end up like little Chris in a wheelchair, huh?
3 days later, Savannah tried to kill herself.
A patriot must always be ready to defend his country against its government.
As before, ever just as sure as the sun will rise.
Into my eyes, you will see what you mean. That's me in the corner. That's me in the spotlight, losing my religion. Tell me how you feel more than words.
President Bush meets with the new Soviet leader Boris Yeltsin and they sign an arms reduction deal. Bush had many international successes, but the country was struggling through a recession. In Eastern Europe, the new country of Georgia suffered a military coup and its president flees the country. Bosnia and Herzegovina proclaim independence from Yugoslavia, but the Serbs rebel. They besiege Sarajevo. Serbia and Montenegro also leave Yugoslavia, and a Bosnian civil war broke out. Before the end of the year, Slobodan Milosevic would become the first president of Serbia. In Salvador, the civil war was declared officially over. The number of dead was estimated at 75,000. Serial killer Jeffrey Dahmer was sentenced to life in prison. He would later be killed by an inmate. Abbas al-Musawi, leader of Hezbollah, was killed by an Israeli gunship. In Armenia, in what would be called the Khojaly massacre, hundreds of civilians were arrested and killed by the armed forces, possibly up to 600 civilians, including 63 children. A civil war breaks out in Afghanistan and President Mohammad Najibullah is removed from office. The skeleton remains of the last Tsar and Tsarina of Russia, Nicholas and Alexandra, were found and identified. In the United States, a civilian, Rodney King, was beaten by police officers. When the officers were acquitted of any wrongdoing, a race riot broke out that left 63 dead and $1 billion in damages. President Momo leaves Sierra Leone when a revolt breaks out. In Algeria, President Mohamed Boudiaf is assassinated. In Colombia, drug lord Pablo Escobar escapes from prison. Soon, however, Colombian authorities arrest 165 drug traffickers more. Hurricane Andrew devastates Homestead, Florida, and the Tennessee Valley. In China, Shen Tong was arrested in Beijing for his role in the Tiananmen Square revolt of 1989. He was later exiled. October 12, 1992, the 500th anniversary of Columbus reaching the Americas. Pope John Paul II was in the Dominican Republic to commemorate the occasion despite several protests around the world. The Pope would also apologize for the Church's house arrest in inquisitional edict against Galileo after Galileo dared to say that the Earth rotated around the Sun 400 years ago. An engineer from the company Sema Group sends the first text message by phone. The Church of England decides to allow women to become priests. And Arkansas Governor Bill Clinton is elected the 42nd President of the United States.
I've killed women and children. Killed just about everything that walks or crawled at one time or another.
You've heard of this.
Are you gonna tell me what's wrong?
No, not here.
Answer!
I want the truth! You can't handle the truth!
In January, during the Sri Lanka Civil War, the Navy kills 35 to 100 civilians in Jaffna Lagoon. A Liberian oil tanker runs aground and spills its load on the Scottish island of Shetland. IBM announces the biggest corporate loss to date for 1992, $4.97 billion. In Canada, amid political and economic chaos, Prime Minister Brian Mulroney resigns. Later on in the year, Kim Campbell becomes the first female prime minister. In Waco, Texas, the U.S. government closes in on a compound run by a religious cult, the Branch Davidians. They were suspected of stockpiling weapons. After a long standoff, the government used tear gas, which blew up some chemicals inside the building, killing 82 cult members and 4 ATF agents. North Korea withdraws from the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty. An epidemic of tuberculosis spreads throughout the world. In Africa, Eritrea breaks away from Ethiopia. A suicide bomber kills President Premadasa of Sri Lanka. Tennis player Monica Seles is stabbed during a match in Hamburg. In Somalia, 24 Pakistani soldiers killed United Nations forces that were stationed there. The United States sends cruise missiles into Iraqi intelligence headquarters in Baghdad after Saddam Hussein kicks out the U.S. inspection team. Michael Jackson is accused of sexually molesting a 13-year-old boy. The Israeli Supreme Court releases and acquits the Nazi death camp guard John Demjanjuk. Palestinian leader Yasser Arafat and Israeli Prime Minister Yitzhak Rabin signed the peace accords at Oslo. President Bill Clinton presides. Cambodia reestablishes its monarchy with leader Norodom Sihanouk. In what was later called the Black Hawk Down incident, the Battle of Mogadishu, U.S. Army Rangers were assisting in the Somalian Civil War and trying to capture some warlords. 2 Black Hawk helicopters were shot down. During all of this, 73 Americans were wounded, 1 was captured, and 18 were killed, along with 1,000 Somalians. An earthquake in India kills almost 10,000. President Clinton sends 6 American warships to enforce economic sanctions in Haiti. A civil war breaks out in Burundi as President Melchior Ndadaye dies. This civil war would last until 2005 and 300,000 would die. Colombian drug lord Pablo Escobar was gunned down by police. The North American Free Trade Agreement, NAFTA, was signed. It was one of the largest trade blocs in the world.
They say your factory is a haven. They say you are good.
Who says that?
Everyone.
Do you love him? Do you? Is it him you love?
Your fugitive's name is Dr. Richard Kimball. Go get him.
Have you ever heard the expression, the customer is always right?
I figure I find you walking around up here, doing a little memory lane.
Well, I still got one.
Yeah, mira, Rolando wants to talk to you.
Won't you please come in?
Thank you, dear.
Figure skater Nancy Kerrigan is attacked by an assailant hired by her rival Tanya Harding's ex-husband during the United States Figure Skating Championship. Valery Polyakov begins orbiting the Earth. He would last a record 437.7 days. In Sarajevo, a Bosnian Serb mortar shell explodes and kills 68 and wounds 200. Israeli Baruch Goldstein opens fire in the West Bank, killing 29 people before they beat him to death. The presidents of Rwanda and Burundi die when a missile shoots down their jet. The Hutu tribes in Rwanda blame the Tutsis. This sparks a civil war, leaving between 500,000 to 1 million dead. China Airlines Flight 140 crashes, leaving 264 dead. In South Africa, Nelson Mandela is elected president. In England, the Channel Tunnel is opened, linking England and France. Nicole Brown Simpson, former wife of football great O.J. Simpson, is murdered outside her home along with friend Ronald Goldman. O.J. Simpson is accused, arrested, but acquitted. Later, he would be held liable in a civil suit. Colombian soccer player Andre Escobar commits a mistake that causes his team the game in the FIFA World Cup. He was shot dead in Medellin. A civil war breaks out in Yemen. In Cyprus, tour guide Louise Jensen is abducted by 3 British soldiers. She is raped and murdered. They were sentenced to life in prison but served 12 years. America Online gives the average person access to the World Wide Web.
Hello, Forrest.
Hello, Jenny.
And what do they call it?
They call it Royale with cheese.
Royale with cheese.
Think you'll ever get out of here?
Me?
Yeah.
Bokehead!
Hear what I want.
I'll make love to you like you want me to, and I'll hold you down. Can somebody tell me how to get things back the way they used to be?
You know, G-Go, I know what Bo don't know. Touch them up and go.